Okay, shall we start? We're going to continue the lecture from last week. So last week we have seen perceptron, a model of perceptrons, and perceptron can be used to discriminate a linearly separable problem, right? And we have seen last week what is the definition of a linearly separable problems and how can we categorize the problem is linearly separable or not linearly separable. We have seen the convex sets. From there, we develop the concept of convex hull, and that's the rigorous way. How can we determine a problem is linearly separable or non-linearly separable? We say a problem is linearly separable if the convex hull are disjoint. And today we will learn first lecture 2B on non-linearly separable problem. How can we develop a simple multi-layer neural nets that we can design by hand? To do so, we will first look at what is the limitation of the perceptron. And then how can we develop methodically how to develop multi-layer neural nets to solve nonlinear problem. So we have discussed linearly separable problem, so non-linearly separable problem now. Back to the iris problem sets, we have seen that Sentosa flower linearly separable against versicolor and virginica. However, versicolor and virginica are not linearly separable because we already discussed the convex hull of versicolor are not disjoint with the convex hull of virginica. So we cannot use a perceptron or a single threshold logic neuron to classify between the two because we cannot draw a straight line between them. Another problem in Boolean functions is XOR. Those are the truth table for XOR. This is the mapping that's going on between input domain to the output domain. In the Boolean cubes, remember, this is our notation. Solid circle bullets means yes. Hollow bullets mean false. Now, if we look at the convex hull, you can see the convex hull for true, convex hull for false are not disjoint, so that they are not linearly separable problem, and so we cannot have a single separable line to discriminate the two classes. However, if we see that we can actually have two separable lines, remember the orientation always pointing to the true solutions or the positive solutions. So we can have the first discrimination line with orientation this way and the other discrimination line oriented this way. So the shadow referring to the false solutions. So we can do that by two lines. It means we can no longer use a single perceptron, meaning we need multiple of them. How can we design a neural networks? We know now we cannot have a single neural network. It must be more than one. But how can we design a neural networks so that this is the discrimination line? Back to logic operations, XOR, if we remember, Let's decompose those into two individual discrimination line. If you see this, it can be decomposed into this and this, right? Which is OR, and this, which is a none. Which is logical. XOR is actually a combination of OR and NAND operation. That is the identity of XOR operations. So you can see that we can make it is XOR made of OR and NAND. And if we have such neural nets, we can actually do XOR. I want you to do it at home by hand. But we will, on the lecture, we will solve this together. But don't just watch me doing it. I want you to also do it at home. Yeah. Before we go to the detail, some of you reading different books, different authors, and I noticed different book use different notation. So I just want to clarify, based on what I have read, how different authors define layers. So some author refer to number of layers when they say 2 layers, but based on the neuron that has a variable weight, that has that actually do some kind of action, that has activation functions. So I just draw illustration of the multi-layer neural nets. But also some author describe number of layers based on the total number of layer. So for example, the first author will set only 3 layers because input layer usually does not has an activation functions. It's only to distribute inputs. Some author describe by the total number of layer. So these authors will call it 4 number of layers. So in any coursework, any exams, any assessments, just to avoid ambiguity, it's better to be detailed. What are the input layers? Are they has an activation function or not? So, however, throughout my lecture notes, I always refer to, if I said input layer does not has activation functions. So the first layer referring to the first hidden layer. This is not the first layer. I always call it input layer. When I said the first layer, it is the first hidden layer that has activation functions. So this is the hidden layer, the second hidden layer. And if there are many layers, and then the last one, output layers. Okay, so if I said 3-layer system, I referring to 3 operation layer, 2 hidden, and 1 output layer. And the input layer here does not do anything. It's just to distribute the input. So the previous problem, so when you read a book, some book draw it like this. Also, it can be drawn like this. They are the same thing. One thing that you want to make sure is the first layer is called the input layer and does not has a functionality, does not has a activation functions, we call it. Is it clear about the nomenclature and the definition? Yeah. So I just want you to be aware when you read different books, and I know some of you look at YouTube on different lectures, and they may have different illustration to illustrate the same thing and different notations. Yeah. Now we're going to discuss the issue why a single neuron cannot be used to uh, to do any classification that we want. The problem is a single neuron has a capacity. We want to define mathematically what is the capacity of a neuron, meaning that if the problem is beyond the capacity of the neuron, of course the neuron cannot do the computation being asked, right? Because it's beyond its capacity. How can we compute? Because we need to quantitatively measure what is actually the limitation. What is the capacity, we call it, of a perceptron or a single threshold logic neuron? So I just want to establish some notation again. I have p number of input points. Remember, for example, I do some observation, right? And then how many number of observation? I have p number of observations. And then what we want to find out is how many times a single neuron can discriminate in all possible combinations. Because if a single neuron can discriminate each individual point perfectly, it means the neuron can solve that problem. So what we want to find is compute all the possible combination a neuron can do to discriminate each individual point. And we will see that neuron cannot discriminate all problems. And those number of discrimination, we call it the capacity. Yeah. Now assume the problem we have is very simple. Again, two-dimensional Boolean problem. Meaning we have input A1 in this direction and then input A2 in this direction, and we only have four possible combination of points. So the dimension is 2. Because we have 2 dimension, we can have bless you, 2 by 2 of possible number of points. For Boolean dimension 2, it is the all combination we have. If we have a single perceptron can do this, discriminate this, right? Anything pointing it here is positive. But the same perceptron can do this. Now the orientation there and everything is negative. So a single discrimination line, first one discrimination line has 2 capacities. Now we need to compute all the possibilities. Now I move the line first, sorry, it is the first one. Now it is possible discrimination line is here. So that's the second one. Also, it is possible discrimination line is here. It is also possible discrimination line is here. It is possible it is here. It is possible here. And finally, it is also possible here. In total, we can have a single neuron can be in all these possibilities, 7 possible positions. Meaning, because each line has 2 sides or 2 different orientation, one perceptron in 2-dimensional problem with 4 number of points, we can have 14 capacities. There are few subtleties here. Now, a single perceptron can perform 14 possible dichotomies for a two-dimensional Boolean problem with 4 input points. But what happens if the point is like this? It's not a Boolean problem, yeah? Now we try to generalize. We try to see different cases. What happens if our points somehow placed like this? Specifically, this point are in the same we call it coincide in a single line. If you do all the exercise that we done before, you see we only has 6 possibilities. It's less. So what you see here, for these particular positions, there are 12 only possible dichotomies. So I want to introduce the concept of position matters. So not only how many number of points, not only the dimension, but also how does this point position in the space. We call this, the points are not in general positions. I put that in quotation mark because this is the term that I want to introduce, general positions. Some theorems that I want you to know is, first, capacity of the perceptron depend not only the dimension, but also the position in space. And the maximum number of possible dichotomies happens when those points happen in the general positions. Like you remember, those 4 points, those are the general positions. But what is general position? So we can say, if a perceptron has a capacity to perform dichotomies of p number of points in general positions, it means that it will be able to dichotomize p number of points in general position. It is the maximum limit. So again, I repeat, if a perceptron, let's say, can discriminate p number of points in general position, because it's higher, right? The capacity is 16, for example, for before. Now, if the problem at hand is not a general position, for example here, and if our perceptron can solve that problem, it definitely can solve this problem. So we set our boundary first. Is that clear? Some remark about general position. These are not assessed, but a good general information for you. So general position is the notation of genericity of a set of points or other geometric object, and it is used in various field. For example, linear algebra. We call square matrix, in most cases, are invertible, right? But for some unique cases, those matrices cannot be invertible. So we call the general problem is square matrix invertible. And also geometry, this is the problem we have, right? Our problem can be illustrated as a geometry problem. So if we have 2 lines that intersect in a single point, so 2 lines, in general, they will intersect in single point. If those lines coincide or parallel, we call those are not generally positioned. The same for 3 points in 3 dimensions. We call if there is 3 points, if those points collide in one single position, it's not general. If those 3 points in a straight line, they are not as general. So this is the theorem. You don't need to remember. It is not assessed, but it is good to know. In computational geometry, general position is defined by a set of points in n dimension is general if no k of them lie in k minus 2 hyperplane. It is a bit wordy, but just show the example. In 2 dimension, a set of points, we call it in general position if no 2 points coincide in a single point. And no 3 points lies in a single line. In 3 dimension, we have 3 possible non-generic case. This is non-generic because point coincide in one. This is non-generic because they are coincide in a line. This one is not generic because they are all coincide in a single plane. So I just want you to aware it is the definition of general position. Yeah. Okay. So we have established that a single perceptron for a general case, because this is the general case, right? In 2 dimension, none of the point coincide in a single point. None of these 3 points coincide in a single line. So this problem is generic. And we already established in a generic problem, a single perceptron can only has 14 capacities. It is the capacities of a perceptron, 14. This is how formally we denote this capacity. The capacity of a perceptron for 4 points in general position in 2 dimension. There are 14. Okay, I repeat again. The number of linear dichotomies that can be done on 4 points in n-dimensional space in general positions. If you remember, now we know that the capacity is 14. But if you remember, if we have Boolean order 2, if we have Boolean order 2, number operation is 2 by power of 2, which is 16, right? So there are more operations on Boolean space compared to the capacity of perceptron. It means out of 16, 14 of them can be solved using a single neuron, but 2 of them cannot. Meaning that the 2 operations are not implementable by a single perceptron. You already seen one of them, XOR, before, right? XOR cannot be solved with a single line. There is another one. Before we look at that, how we calculate those? Before we do it by hand, right? What happens if you have 100 points and imagine in your realistic problem, you take a measurement of, we have discussed this last week about predicting rain and sun day, and then you take a measurement over a year, so you have 364 days, let's say, and then you have temperature, you have humidity, you have pressure, you have let's say you measure at elevation, height, and then you have so many things. Those the dimension or the feature space. Let's say you have 6 feature space, and then you have 65 point of observation. How can we know that uh, what uh, how many neurons that you need to be able to solve this problem? So what we want to do here is compute the capacities of the perceptron, and if we know the capacity, we can compute what is the dimension that we need to do our computation on, right? Because if we use an appropriate dimension, we can solve that problem. We will see this concretely. But how can we compute first the capacity of the neuron? I will not derive the equation here. I just take it from this paper. There is a lot of derivation involved, but we can uh, simplify the equation further. Okay, what I'm doing here, I expand this equation in this way. So LPN expanded into 2 using this identity. So LPN is equal to this, right? Following this rule. So I substitute this LP to here. And then LPN plus 1 is this. I use the same identity. And then I plug this to the same equation. So we call this cursive substitution. And then we have this line. I keep doing it. I keep, set the second one. Now, if you look at this, the prefactor, it is 1, 3, 3, 1. The first iteration, 1, 2, 1. If you just keep going on, you will see the pattern that it is when you do polynomial in the high school, right? This called the binomial Newton, the prefactor. And then if you keep going down until p minus 1, p minus 1, minus 2, so we have this 1, 1, 1, and then everything can be shown into the last line. They are equal to this. I just put them in the compact form. And remember, if we have one point, basically P is the point, right? If we have a single point, regardless of the dimension, that point can always be positive or negative. So they can be 2. But of course, we cannot have less than 0 dimension. So in any dimension, a single point has 2 capacity. So knowing this boundary condition, we can further simplify by first, this is not convenient because LP plus 1 and N. I just want to make it into more convenient notation. So instead P plus 1, I change it into P. So P become P minus 1, right? Because I just change P plus 1 become P. If I have P, become P minus 1. Using this boundary condition, we can further simplify this equation. So rather than using this equation, we can use these 2 equations depending on the case, depending on the dimension, and depending on the number of points. How do we calculate the binomial Newton? Remember again how to calculate binomial Newton. For small number, you can do it by hand, right? Remember this. But for very big number, you have to do in the computer. But even that is not straightforward, because to calculate this for very large number of A, your integer calculation easily over the capacity of integer. So there are few tricks to do that. And you will do that in the lab. We have by hand right before, by drawing lines, very slow to calculate this is 14. Now let's calculate that using this equation quickly. So using that equation, I do not want to use this equation because I want to actually prove this equation by doing this. Okay. So we want to calculate this using the general equation here. I just plug it for P equal 4 and N equal 2. So P equal 4, N equal 2. So I need to sum from 0 until 3. And then I need to compute the binomial for order 3 for different I. And I need also to compute L1 for N. We have 2 for various I. I expand this. And then remember this boundary condition. Anything that less than 0 is 0. So this is 0. And then everything here is equal to 2. So we have 2 sum I until 2 for 3 and I. And that is exactly this second form. Okay. So this second equation comes from expanding it and then remove the negative term and then combine them together, find the sum. So you can see we just derive this equation by solving a specific problem. So we need to calculate the prefactor binomial prefactor. Basically, I just need to calculate this. And we have found it 14. Now, we want to prove this second situation, meaning for P less than N plus 1. So I can just use N3, right? We already, we have not actually by hand, but we can do it in here. So using this equation, again, now I have N equal 3. So this is from 3 rather than from 2. I expand it again. Now using the boundary case, now everything is here because everything is 0 or above. So what we have is 2 because all the L for 1, I is I above 0. So everything is 2 times this sum. Basically, we need to sum this. There is an interesting properties. in binomial Newton. If you see the first one is to the power of 0, the total of everything in this row. If you see this one, to the power of 1, because the total is 2. This one, the total is 4, to the power of 2. Keep continue, to the power of 3, to the power of 4, to the power of 5, to the power of 6, to the power of 7. So, for order 3, the total of the row is to power of 3. And then, what we have is to the power of 4. And that's actually basically this equation, right? We have 4 power, p equal 4 and to the power of 4. So we have 16. Any question on how to use the Clover formula to compute the capacity of neuron? Okay. If no question, I will just go ahead. We already see the capacity of a perceptron to solve 4 points in Boolean order dimension 2 is 14. There are 2 power of 2 possible mapping functions for Boolean dimension 2. We already see XOR is nonlinear and the other function is XNOR. So I just tell you this. Those two are not linearly separable. We have touched a little bit that XOR can be solved by combination of OR and NAND, and then combine at the end using an AND operators. So we will going to solve this. But if you're being critical, you can actually ask another question. Why don't we try to solve XOR in higher dimension? If we can solve XOR in higher dimension, we know that a perceptron in higher dimension has capacity of 16, meaning that all Boolean order 2 problem can be solved in higher dimension in order 3. And we can say that a perceptron will have capacity in the higher dimension to solving Boolean order 2 problem. So there are 2 ways we can solve XOR. First, we can use multi-layers, and the second way is expanding it to the higher dimension. There are 2 ways. Again, I want to reinforce this message. If you have problem, even a non-linearly separable problem, you may be able to solve it in higher dimension using a single neuron. So even a problem that is so difficult to solve in lower dimension can be solved in higher dimension. So this is trips that many AI engineer forget that, oh, if we have a problem, I make a neural net, and then the neural net give low accuracy. So I just increase the number of layers. That can be the wrong way to do it, because what you do is you increase the number of layer, you risk of having overfitting on those issues. There are other ways you can do it more elegantly with less computational resource by doing the computation in higher dimension. We will see that in concrete to solve XOR. Okay, first solution, XOR using multi-layer approach. So we have input layer, first hidden layer, and output layer directly. So we have 2 layers neural nets to solve XOR. This is the truth table of XOR, and this is what we want, right? It is what we want for XOR. What we're trying to do, I want you to understand this concept. What multi-layer neural net does. It converts an input points from 2 dimension to another dimension, but the same order. So you see, from Boolean order 2, when it get here, y is another order 2. We have the same number of dimension. And then only the last stage, the dimension reduced. So multi-layer, in the hidden layer, there is no change of dimension. The dimension remains. The first step, OR, we just do it by hand, just like before. A1, A2, we perform OR for this. Yeah, we get this. I skip the process of summing the input, multiply the weight, and then apply the activation function. I skip that. I just now assuming we have designed our neural network, and our neural network can do OR. I just assume that first. Yeah. Our first neural network can perform OR, and it is the first stage. Y1. The second one, Y2, is the none. I just apply none. Now, if we apply un, 0 and 1 is 0. 1 and 1, we get 1. 1 and 1, we get 1. 1 and 0, we got 0. So, I just want to prove this quickly, that this neural network can perform XOR. We just do it by hand now. What actually happening inside the neural network is we have these 4 points in 2 dimension. The first hidden layer perform the following transformations. From this point to that point, from that to that, from that to that. So basically, you can see from 0, 0 to 0, 1. From 0, 1 become 1, 1. From 1, 0 become 1, 1. From 1, 1, we get 1, 0. You can see the dimension is the same, but the number of points reduces from 4 to 3. And then the output layer perform the final transformation F2, which perform the following mapping, right? From 0, 1 to 0, from 1, 1 to 1, 1, 1 to, I do this first. 0, 1, 1, 0 to 0, and 1, 1 to 1. Okay, so you can see multi-layers keep the dimensions in the hidden layer, but reduces the point. And that is the purpose why multi-layer neural network works. Not by increasing dimension, but by reducing the number of points. Because if you remember, in the capacity depend on 2 parameters, number of point and dimension. You can basically you want to have how can I make the capacity, so the maximum capacity of the neuron in two dimension is 16. I want to make it a problem to have less possible dichotomy. Now, if you have 3 points, the dichotomy possibility is less. And so a single neuron at the end can solve this problem now. They just need one single line. Again, multi-layer neural networks works by reducing the number of points, but the number of dimension inside the hidden layer remains the same. Now, the second problem, the second way, which is the most interesting way in my opinion. Rather than having a multi-layer problem, you can have the single neuron, but increase the dimension. By increasing the dimension, what we're trying to do is increase the possibility that a problem that was linearly non-separable become linearly separable. So what we want to do is we have two-dimensional problem, input. I want to have our output only one dimension, right? Only one. But in the middle, I want to increase the dimension. The third dimension must be a function of the two because we want to keep the number of points the same. How can we do that? So you can see now, I can just have an intermediate operation. So you can see it is not even 2 layers, right? Because the layers has another set of neurons. So what we have is only an intermediate process. We just want to increase the dimension. And in this case, I just arbitrarily use an. And I said arbitrary because if you remember, if I can just increase to dimension order 3, the capacity is 16. So as long I can have any functions in the middle that combine the two, you can increase the dimension. If you see this, it is similar to when you learn support vector machine is the kernel functions. So basically what I do here, introduce extra dimension by adding an extra kernel. So it's a similar concept. When was it? The support vector machine is quite early, right? You have already gone that, huh? Week 3, right? Yeah. So if you remember your week 3, good. That's actually what I introduced here is an kernel. So I just following the process now. I calculate y1. Y1 is basically a1, no change. Y2, no change. Now I just introduce my third dimension. My third dimension basically operating on this. A2, A2, A1, A2. And now I have 3 dimension for Y. Our perceptron change. If you see at the output, now this perceptron has 3 input. We have 3 dimension. If we have 3 dimension, we have Boolean cubes. And this is how it looks like. The input is 2 dimension, right? And then we want to map it into the third dimension. Let's see how the mapping works. Look at 0, 0 become 0, 0, 0. 1, 0, 1 become 0, 1, 0. 1, 1, 0 become 1, 0, 0. 1, 1 become 1, 1, 1. I just draw a line so you can see within the three-dimensional cubes, those are our mapping. And the final perceptron, our final perceptron, it is what we want. Okay? So, what we want is 0, 0, 0 become hollow. 1, 1, 1 become hollow. And then the point, this one, 0, 1, 0 remain solid. 1, 0, 0 become solid. Now, I want to stress again. You see, it is dimension 2. We increase dimension 3. And then at the output, we reduce. But look at the number of point. The number of point, the same. We have 4. In here, although the dimension increase, we still have 4 points. Now, in higher dimension, we can solve this using a single neuron by, it is what we want. We want to map into 0 and 1 by splitting it by a plane rather than a line. Because in 3 dimension, a neuron with 3 inputs make a plane. Okay? Is it clear? And this is actually a question for, I don't remember which year. So, to compute the weight, this one, the weight, all the weight, and this weight can perform XOR operations. We will not going to try to solve this by hand. We will going to discuss this for exam revision sessions. There are plenty of questions similar like this. Okay, now the summary. We have looked at Clover capacity and how to calculate those. And the theorem is the number of possible mapping in n dimension should be, in general, is larger than the capacity of a neuron. So it is just the general case again. In general, most problem cannot be solved with a single neuron. And to solve this problem, we have looked at 2 ways. Reduce the number of points. And how we do it? We use multi-layer neural nets. Or the other way around, we increase the dimension. Because if we increase the dimension, we increase the capacity of the perceptron so that we increase the probability that the problem shift from a nonlinear separable problem become linearly separable problem. And how we do it? We have an intermediate variable that function of the original input points to increase the dimension, which is the kernel functions. Okay. Lippmann in 1989 introduced a methodology. If you can present the problem in 2D, so if you can diagrammatically draw it, there is a way you can actually design a neural networks, and it is called the Lippmann methodology. The rule of thumb is like this. The rule is the first hidden layer create hyperplane, the input space, And then each neuron in this layer will create one line. And then the second hidden layer will combine using AND, combine them, and then create a hyperregion. We will see that. And then the output layer will combine different part of this hyperregion into one superregion. It is a rule of thumb, so sometimes it may not follow this rule. But in general, this is works. Okay, now let's see in concrete. The first hidden layer. Let's say we have three, in this case, we just have two-dimension input, but we have how many regions? So for example, we have how many neuron? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 neuron. Each neuron can, remember, perform a single line. So let's say the first neuron perform this discrimination, perform these dichotomies. And then the second hidden layer, because it is an AND, imagine if we perform AND on this, we can have this, right? And then the threshold logic neuron will impose this, only the, because it is AND, only the all the one that is overlap, that is the solution. And then the final OR will combine this and this. So what do we see? If we have three layer of neural net, in principle, you should be able to perform any shape, right? If we have infinitely many number of neuron, because you can just make your slice in whatever shape and then slowly build up on the second hidden layer different sub-region in the second hidden layer, and then in the final layer join them into the overall shape that you want. So the graphical summary is, if you only have one layer, remember it is one input layer, yeah, it is the input layer. So if you only have a single layer, what you can do is only half plane. If you have two layers, so one hidden layer, one output layer, one input layer, what you can do is arbitrarily convex or open or a closed region, because you can have another to close it here. If you have three layers, in principle, you can have arbitrary discrimination problem. Final remarks for the first part. There is no single hidden layer neural net that can separate mesh regions. So something like this. You need at least three layers. And to solve any arbitrary classification problem, at least 3-layer network should be in principle sufficient, given that we have enough number of neuron. So sometimes if I see coursework, why you want to use 10 layers? That is overkill. Okay, we will see this kind. This is the kind of problem using a Lippmann problem. I take this from exam paper 2001, 2022. We will discuss this in revision exam as well. But this is the kind of problem that you can use Lippmann problem, Lippmann approach to solve a discrimination problem. So just assume that we have measurement of temperature and pressure of a material, and then we know that if these are all the points, if the temperature in this temperature and pressure in this region, they are vapor, in this region is solid, and in this region is liquid, you can actually build a neural network that can, given an input of temperature and pressure, to be able to discriminate this problem. Okay, a very important concept. I cannot continue to lecture 3 before I explain this. So that's why I'm going to explain this. We have talked about orientation factor, but maybe this is not clear. If you have a discrimination line into dimension, right? It is the input space. You have a discrimination like this. The normal factor is the orientation, and the orientation itself is the weight. Okay. I will talk in detail the proof of this in the revision session, but I just want you to have this concept. If you have a discrimination line, the normal factor is the weight itself. If you have 3 dimension, the same, it is the input space, so A1, A2, A3. The normal orientation, the normal factor is the orientation, right? And that orientation is also the weight. So this is a very important concept. If you know, if you can draw, basically, if you can draw the discrimination plane, it means you know the weight. So that's the first very important concept. If you can draw discrimination line, you know the weight. How do you calculate the weight? That's the mathematics that you need to revise. For example, if you have a line, how do you find this? By factor product must be 0, right? This one, if you have how to define a plane, you need 3 points, and then you need to how to get the normal factor. You use curl operation to find the normal of a plane. This is just an example of a question problem from last year. So if we can draw it, of course we can find the orientation, and if you can find the orientation, you can find the weight. How do you find it? That's the mathematics that you need to revise. Okay. I give this exercise last week. Did anyone do it? Has anyone tried to prove this before we going to break? No one? Because every single year, I've been giving this exercise, and I told them, if you can show me you do the exercise, you will get 1 neuron stuffed doll. No one has done it. So I still have this year by year. Unless if anyone can show me you work for it. You work it? Huh? Okay, good. So someone did it. So I lost my stuffed doll. This is a neuron model. So you can see it is the neuron model. Remember, this is the neuron cell. This is the axon and the dendrites. Now, this is the solution that you can do it that way, or I can just solve it diagrammatically. So this is an, right? This is an. What we want is to have a discrimination line like this. Now I just the proof that I want to have is consider this case. If I want to have them the same weight, it means that I will have the same weight. And then if you remember, I can draw this discrimination line. Remember that the orientation vector perpendicular to it, right? So it is the weight that we want, and then the input bias always 1. I just use this discrimination line. At the discrimination line, it must be 0, so I can have this as a bias. And then you can iterate it for different combination of A1 and A2. And then what you can find is if you have A1, A2 here, you cannot have this because at here, the discrimination line is not 0, but it is already has of, remember if it's 0, it's become 1. So what you need to do is increase the value A1, A2. So you need to increase this until A1, A2 equal to 1 minus 2. So it's become the solution, the bound is like that. This is a very important operator, an. That's why I prove it. And if you remember, the Lippmann will use an a lot. So this is must be in your head. If I have an neuron, you need to remember this is the rule. Okay, I need 5-minute breaks. Okay, 5-minute break. Okay, now we will continue to final part of today. What we have done so far, linear and nonlinear problem, we try to solve it by hand. So we try to find methodical way. How can we solve it by hand? We look at by increasing the two concept we know now. For linear problem, perceptron should be able to solve the problem. If the problem is linear, single perceptron should be able to solve the problem. If the problem is nonlinear, there are two ways we can solve it: by increasing the number of layer or increasing the dimension and still using a single neuron. Now, even for a single neuron, if you have so many data points, if you have so many dimensions, you will find that finding the weight is becoming difficult. So here we will try to build an algorithm to have computer compute it for us. Basically that. And to do that, we will observe and understand the working principle of different algorithm. Okay. Wait. This is 3B. We need 3A first. Where is 3A? Okay. but what I said is still remain true when I just said when I see that it's wrong. Okay, so what we want to start now, we want to start developing an algorithm for perceptron. We will first we need to understand what is input space, what is weight space, and then we will look at perceptron learning rule, that algorithm that help us to compute the weight for perceptron. Okay, just some introduction about learning algorithm. So basically, this is an algorithm or a procedure that will encode our observation point in terms of weights, right? Basically, what we want to try to do is we have so many different observation. Remember our weather forecasting problem. We have many observations and we have our output, which is sunny or rain. And what we want to do is instead of from those points become just a neural network that is defined in terms of the weights. And one thing that we have seen before that is depend on the architecture. Uh, Also from the first lecture, we already see different type of architecture, right? The Hopfield and then all the multi-layers, even there is the recurrent networks. So different architecture has different way to optimize or how to learn it. And in most of this learning algorithm, the way it works is by iteratively modifying the connection weight, the connection strength or the weight. Is try to iterate through all the data points and then find the appropriate weight to discriminate or to fit. And learning is data driven, right? Of course, you need to give the input, training data, and like the example I keep mentioning, we need a pair of the input and the output. It does not work if you only have the input. Uh, Alternatively, if you remember, there are other type of learning that you only need the input, you don't need the output. And those is the unsupervised learning. And usually that involves to cluster into certain number of unknown classes, but that's not the kind of work that we want to do. We want to do supervised learning, and to do supervised learning, we need both pair of the input and the target, the desired output. And what is the specific neural net that we want to solve? So generically, what we have is input and target output. And whatever neural net architecture that we want to train. And then the algorithm or the neural net will learn by try to correct the error on each iteration for each point. And then the way it works, we call this gradient descent weight adaptation. We will see that not this week but next week. And we try for some kind of weight, and then we look at what we get, and we try to find the error, and then we update the weight based on the error that we see. So all supervised learning has this typical guides, this kind of procedure. You give input to certain kind of neural nets with some kind of random allocated weight, and then you see what you got, and then compare what you got with what your target, see how big is the difference, and then we update based on that error. On the other hand, if you remember like k-learning, k-clustering, and so on, k-nearest neighbors, and so on, what you do is you try to define clusters from some kind of data. There is no clustering, right? And what you got is try to find the cluster at the end. This is the unsupervised learning. It is not the kind of learning that we want to learn. Some differences. Supervised learning, you need the both the class and also the input, but for unsupervised learning, you don't need the pattern class. In fact, the pattern class is the output of the supervised learning. And then the way it works in supervised learning, you will correct the error using this gradient descent approach. And usually unsupervised learning, you use first order differential equation learning approach, different type of approach. Here, we try to find the global error, because you remember the illustration I draw there, you find the error at the end, and then you use the global error to solve, to update or to optimize your weight of your neural nets. But not in the unsupervised learning, you need local information. Learning for supervised learning, usually offline, but now you have different type of algorithm that you can do it online. Unsupervised learning typically can be done in real time. Even if you have a new addition, the new addition can actually see, for example, the distance between the cluster that already defined, and so on. So just some introduction about the difference between supervised and unsupervised learning. Unsupervised learning, you have learned it there. I think that's also the second week or the fourth week, something like that. We're not going to look at unsupervised learning. Instead, we will see supervised learning. We will always start from linearly separable sets. And then we want to find a neural net that can split that, but now imagine your problem is so big. It's not something that you can do by hand. And this linearly separable set, again, you can look at it. How do you know? By the convex hull, and they should be disjoint. Now we want to develop our neural net. First, let's allow our neural net weight to be dynamic, meaning that the weight can change. And we call this dynamic adaptive linear element, Adeline. It is Widrow in 1990s that developed this learning algorithm of Adeline. So what we have, I just want to gather all the information we know so far. Yeah. So what we have is an input, and the input always start from the bias, and then we have dimension n. So in compact form, we said that our input is dimension n plus 1 because we have additional of bias. The weight, we have also the same size or the same dimension, n plus 1. Okay. The activation state is given by the inner product between the weight and the input. Remember again here, right? And then the activation functions will perform a nonlinear transformation on, sorry, this should be x, yeah. It is not y, it is x. I call it y. Okay, I call it this activation function y, and then it is y. I'm really sorry though, in the previous lecture I used X. So in here I use Y. But yeah, I use Y here, and then it is Y. One thing that I want you to note slightly here, it's slightly different. The threshold logic neuron is not the same like before. Because I do not like, in the previous one, it is equal, right? If Y larger equal than 0 is become 1. But that's not convenient when we have something in the boundary, we call it yes. Usually we want to have in the boundary, we just say no. Oh yeah, iteration index k indicate the discrete time dependent of input weight. So that's the one that I told you I will iterate. So the k here, I will iterate for each individual point or iterations. Okay. This is what we previously used, right? If the activation state is larger or equal to 0, I have the output equal 1 for threshold logic neuron. But it is just not convenient for y equals 0, for the activation state equal to 0. So it is just, because it is quite ambiguous, I will just use from now on, yeah, I think I missed one slide. Yeah, so from now on, if it is equal to 0, it will equal to 0. So only if it's positive, that it is equal to 1. So it's just clearer. If the activation state is positive, we have output 1. So what we have now on hand is we have a pair of input and output pattern. And then again, I bring this example. We have so many number of points, so we need, of course, what are each individual observation, and also the class, whether it is class Sunny or class Rain. No one be able to design this kind of problem by hand, right? Because the problem is so big. So what we want is to have a learning algorithm that can do it for us. The training set, we have input and our desired output. We have n number of points, right? We have n number of data. So we will iterate. So there are different number of points, k. And we will see how can we automate this. Okay, pattern space and weight space. This is the new concept. Activation state, you know, this is the inner product of weight and input. And remember, at the separating hyperplane, it is the situation we have. So it is the input space, or some people call it pattern space, input space, because it is A1, A2. We have the hyperplane that's separating the two classes, and then we have the orientation that always pointing into the class 1 or the positive class. And this is the for specific weight. Remember, because specific weight will have this orientation, right? This is equal to the weight. So this hyperplane is for a specific case of weight. Now you can imagine the other way around. You can draw instead the weight in the weight space. Now you can draw for a specific line for specific input points. If previously the normal factor of the hyperplane is the weight, in the weight space, the normal factor is the point itself. how we find the solution region. Now, to give you concrete example, just consider that we have 4 points, and these 4 points split it into 2 classes again. We have point 1, point 2, part of class 1. We have point 3, point 4, part of class 0. Basically, what I do here, class 1 is the positive class. The class 0 belong to the negative class. What we want to have is, using the threshold logic neuron, right? We want to have the point A1, A2, if we put it into this weight that we want to find, to have activation state to be positive so that we can have class 1. But for input point A3, A4, if we plug it here, for whatever weight that we want to find negative. So that's what we want to try to do. Just repeat again. For point 1 and 2, we want to have positive inner product. For point 3 and 4, we want to have a negative inner product. So I draw the discrimination line in the weight space, specifically for point A1. Remember, the orientation will point into the positive solution. So the shading region is the solution for point A1, right? So the shading region is the same direction as the orientation. Now, if we go to point A2, A2 also we want to have a positive inner product. So the solution is in the same side as the one pointed by the orientation. However, if we look at point 3, the solution is at the opposite side from the one pointed by the orientation. The orientation, remember, always point to the positive inner product. Since for point A3 we want the negative inner product, the solution, the shaded region, is the opposite side. The same for point A4. The solution region is the opposite side from the orientation. And the solution weight that we want to find is any weight here. If we can find any weight in the solution region, it will for sure satisfy this and satisfy that. So basically, all the learning algorithm that you will develop is try to find a single weight that satisfy all the combination of each individual point. So your learning algorithm want to find only one weight within this region. If you can just find one weight, that already can do any problem given. Yeah, any weight in the solution region is a valid solution, and the method to find this solution is called linear programming, developed by many people, including John Feynman. This is the guy, and this is the first neural network computers back then. And when they developed it during the Cold War era, this book and his work is actually confidential, and they released it after the Cold War when the USSR dissolved. That's quite interesting history when you read the history of this. Okay, now the summary so far. We see supervised, unsupervised learning. And what we will do is supervised learning, and that's depend on the architecture, and we need training sets. And we do not like the case of state equal to 0. So we consider that as also misclassifications. And the pattern space and the weight space, they are a dual space. I want you to always remember that. Input space and the weight space. And solution region is by solving for each individual point in the weight space by linear programming. Now we want to automating it. Now we just only consider a linearly separable case first, and then we will build based on the fundamental of this algorithm for nonlinear separable case in next week. So this week we will finish. We only have 20 minutes left, and then for linearly separable problem. And then it is very important theorem. If our given problem is linearly separable, the method that we're going to learn is called the perceptron learning algorithm, will give you an appropriate solution. That is the theorem. So you can use this algorithm to determine numerically if your problem is linear or non-linearly separable. And in nutshell, it is how it works. I use the same, let's say the 4 points that we have before. This is our solution that we want to go. Always in typical learning algorithm, we start by randomly allocated the weight by random numbers. We start by some random position. And then for each iteration, we will have to check for each point and then check whether this weight already solving a particular problem for a particular point. First, let's say for iteration 1, we want to check with point 1. For point 1, the solution is down there, right? Pointing there. And then 1 does not solve even for A1. So the weight has to move. Now, iteration 2, we need to check with point the second one. And then, for point 2, this also not solving for discrimination. Point 2 is still wrong, so it need to move. Now we need to check for point 3. For point 3, the solution is down there. It still does not solve it, so it need to move. And then for point 4, the solution is down there. Also, this point, weight pointed by this end is not solving, so we still need to move. And then now we're going back to point A1. This vector pointed by the weight here, not solving for A1 because the solution is down here. So it still need to move. Now we check for A2. For A2, this point already solving for A2. So there is no need for update for A2. So if we go to the next one, it stays there. Now we need to check for A3. This particular point, the triangle, not solving for A3 because the solution for A3 is down there. So it need to move. Now we going back to A4. A4, the solution is down here. This point is already solving. And in fact, it's already in the solution region. So if we iterate back, it will remain there. Because if it already correct, you don't need to move. The question is, how do I know this direction? That is the key of this particular lecture. How to find the path that going to the right solution. That is the key. And to do that, we need to see the input space. Let's assume I just pick a particular point. For particular point in the input space, I have this discrimination line. Assume for class positive. Assume for class positive. So the solution is here, right? The solution is down here. Now assume that our random weight is there. Of course, this random weight is wrong. Of course, yeah, this point is wrong. Because if we weight this times this, we get negative. Because anything behind the orientation is negative and is wrong. So we need to move. But where to move? This is the vector for the weight, right? From away from the origin to this point. Remember when we do the inner product is basically the projection, because we're performing inner product between the weight and the input. We perform projection between the weight and the input. This is the projection. And it is the magnitude of the projection. And if we times with the normalized vector direction of the orientation, we get now it is become the black arrow there. And that's the direction, the fastest direction to the solution region for this particular point. So this equation, I can put it in this way, right? Basically, everything here divided by this. Basically, everything here, it is a scalar value, everything here. And the only vector part is this. So, for class positive, for positive class, the direction towards the solution is given by the same as the orientation. For negative class, so this is for negative class. Let's assume it is point AK, the orientation here. Of course, now the solution is here because the negative class, the solution is not the same direction as the orientation. Use the same procedure. We look at the weight. Now, if I times the weight with the input points, now what I have is a positive, which is wrong. So, again, I perform the inner product times the normalized error, normalized point vector. And you can see that they are actually opposite directions. In vector, if you have the opposite direction, is a negative, right? So the conclusion is this. If we have class positive, and the inner product is negative, we need to do some correction, and the correction is given by the positive value times the input point for that specific point. If our class is negative and the inner product is positive, the correction is negative of the input point. However, if the weight is already correct, don't do anything. You don't need to do corrections, right? So this is the perceptron learning law. There are 3 different cases. And I want to reiterate again, I already mentioned it before, that this perceptron learning law guarantee for linearly separable problem. In principle, any value of eta does not affect the stability of the algorithm, but it may lead to overshooting. What is overshooting? I just keep this quickly, because we don't have much time. So now assume we have input point A1, A2. Input A1, the solution is here. So it means A1 is belong to class positive. A2, the orientation and the solution is the opposite side. So A2 must be class negative. So that's why the solution region is here. Assume that we start at point a random weight here. Now, if we compare with this point A1, is already correct. So we don't need to move. But when we check for A2, it's not correct for A2. So it need to correct the weight from here. And then the direction perpendicular to this line for A2. So that's why it's going there. Now, if we check with A1 after A2, now they are not in the correct, this weight triangle is not appropriate for A1. So it need to correct again, and then the correction will be perpendicular to this line, right? So that's why it's going there. Now, we check again for A2. They are not in the, for A2, this is triangle, not the right weight for A2, so it need to correct as well. So you see, if your eta is small, you may actually go to the solution region. But because your eta is so big, it overshot. So when you use perceptron learning law, you need to experiment the same thing when you do a neural net, when you use a neural network, and then there will be momentum, acceleration, speed. Those similar concept is this: how fast to correct, and how fast you don't want it too fast, because sometimes when it's too fast, you can miss the solution and it's a little overshoot. Although, if you keep going on, at the end, it will go to the solution, but it takes ages. Any question on this? Okay. Now, this is the flow diagram, your first algorithm of perceptron learning law. Everything here is basically just setting up, right? So you have input points, there are a number of k, and then you need to set learning. So everything that you need to initialize first is some random factor, and then the learning rate, and then you just start iterating for all points. For all points, you compute the inner products, which is this, and then you see whether it is already the situation, right? Whether it is already correct or not. If wrong classification, if it correct, oh yeah, if it correct classifications, you don't need to do anything. You just go to the next one. But if it not, you need to do corrections. After correction, you go back to the other points, and then this just keep going on forever until when it's true for all points, everything will go here, and then iteration will complete. That's the summary so far. Learning algorithm for linearly separable problem, which is the perceptron learning law. And the fastest direction to the correct weight is depend on the weights, the orientation in the weight space, and only update only if it misclassifies. If it correct already, you don't need to update anything. For linearly separable problem, perceptron learning law must give you a solution. And that's it for today. Sorry, I'm rushing up a little bit for the last few minutes. But is there any question? Okay. So see you in the lab tomorrow, yeah.